We have Will Deman, who is not going to talk about his day job. He's actually going to talk about his secondary job or his passion project. And what we're going to be kind of just digging into, because a lot of people like to understand what kind of the startup life is like. So we're just going to dig into an example here with Will and figure out about his passion project. So welcome, Will.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Great. So first off, just introduce us. Give us the elevator pitch about your idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, what about who I am? Maybe that'll help get a little bit of context.
Sure,
If people don't
let's
know
start.
it, I'm Will. I currently work as a staff engineer at Monzo for my full-time job, like already mentioned, and I used to work at other tech companies as well, some Expensify, Uber, that kind of thing. But yeah, what I'm doing right now is I'm starting to build another product. So I'm building something which is a tool that aims to help engineers or anyone really in the company create and manage and maintain the alerts that they want a little bit easier than it currently happens. So if you're not familiar with alerts, it's basically like fire alarms for your software. You need to know when things are broken, when things are going wrong. Usually it's an engineer that gets called maybe in the middle of the night. And the way that those things are configured and set up right now, it can be a little bit painful depending on some of the tools that people are using. So my idea is a product to sort of help make that a little bit smoother for people and manage those things a little bit easier.
Great. So is this a big problem for people, or like, because for years there have been alerts, there have been the people getting the phone call in the middle of the night. So how big a problem is this actually?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the tooling around this stuff is always evolving, and the sort of the like driving factor behind me thinking about this now is maybe that the certain technologies that are evolving as well and becoming very popular. And so there's new metric systems coming into play that are growing really rapidly, becoming like the de facto standard, but the tooling for them is sort of lacking a little bit behind the growth that they're experiencing. So there's like tooling exists for other products already, maybe that does a similar kind of thing, but a lot of people are still finding the pain here. So I don't necessarily, the question like how big of a problem or how big of an idea is it is an interesting one. Like I'm not necessarily like shooting for the next unicorn billion dollar company. Like, crazy respect for people that go and do that, but the odds are significantly stacked against you. I'm trying to find a bit of a niche. I do think it could be a multi-million-dollar company if things worked out, but you don't always have to shoot for the moon. It's okay to build something that's iterative and additive in a way, and that just adds some value and people are willing to pay for it, and then it can be a great project or a great company in the end.
Great. No, I like that kind of framing of it, and which kind of, as you were saying, it doesn't need to be the biggest thing. So where did this idea come from, or is this your first idea? Have you had 10 before? Why have you chosen this is the one you're going to get behind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think probably like everyone that's looking to do something, I've had 100 before, but I never did anything about them, right? So it's like I kind of subscribe to the I think it's Mark Randolph is the co-founder of Netflix, has a saying that's like every idea it starts as a bad idea, or every idea is a bad idea, and it's really just execution and iteration that matters, and that's what develops every idea into something meaningful. And maybe 90% of those will end up not going anywhere, and then you iterate. And so the idea on its own is probably not worth much. It's doing something with it. And why do I think that this is something that might be able to get past that first barrier of it's just an idea? And the way that I've been looking at it is kind of like well, it's like what do you know? What do you already know? So I'm an engineer. I work every day as an engineer in a company. I need to write alerts from my systems that I'm building internally, and our team does, and every other team at Monzo, for example, does, and many other companies. And so every time you go through that, you feel some pain of where the tooling isn't quite right. And so working, like picking an idea that you know inside out, and you go through the pain every day, gives you a really obviously good perspective of what you might be able to solve, and where you might be able to make things better for other people, assuming that they're going through the other pain. And that's a big assumption to make. But there's some ways to get some extra validation, right? Like this is also a problem that I've seen at other bigger companies like Uber. By the time Uber got up to hundreds or thousands of engineers, this was a problem that Uber solved internally. And so seeing that this was a problem that someone else took on, for Uber specific technologies that isn't necessarily, replicatable across, everyone else by default. There's no open source thing, for example, maybe that does this. But it was a need that they had, they solved it, and the product was, a good one. And so that's it, like it's an incredibly valuable thing to know that it's like somebody has done this before and it works for them. If you can see a product at your own company internally that has helped your own company do something really, really well, then you've got like one of the key first pieces of validation to say, well, maybe I can take that to everything else. So those two things combined, it's like knowing the problem, feeling the pain myself daily or maybe weekly, and then seeing that this has worked somewhere before leads me to think that this might be a good idea. But who knows? Like I'm perfectly willing to turn around in a few months and say, actually, this wasn't going to work for me, and it might not work for other people either.
Right. Now, it reminds me, I like that attitude because it reminds me of Segment, the company Segment. I can't remember what they originally were doing, but they had this annoying problem of having to consolidate lots of data into one thing and then pumping it out everywhere else. So they released it open source or something, and it got a hell of a lot of traction. And as their main idea was failing, they were like, well, obviously this is a pain point. So they just turned that into their business and got bought out for a couple of billion. So
it's incredible when it happens. Like Slack were like a gaming company, right? Trying to build a game, and then they knew, we need a better way for us to talk to each other internally, and they ended up with Slack. And obviously, the story, we all know the story from there. But like, it's I think it's a really important thing to realize if you're going to do something like this, that the idea you start with is probably not the idea you're going to finish with. But pivoting is really tricky as well. Like knowing what to build is 90% of the problem in my eyes. That's what I struggle with anyway. And so being open to going, maybe this needs to change. It's not working. I'm going to try something else is a really good mindset to have, I think, but it's tough.
Great. So we've talked a lot about the product. I'd love to get a bit more, as you were saying, just kind of there into the motivations of what are you doing. So why are you doing this? Like, what's the ultimate goal?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think the ultimate goal for me, like to be candid, is like to achieve like financial independence. So I sort of stopped to think a little bit about it, and I've been working as an engineer for 10 years or so, and it's like, okay, if I want to achieve like true like financial independence, what's the best way to do that? Is it to join a startup early and have you grow with the startup and do really well and get shares or whatever, but then you've got to pick the startup, and it's not easy. Most startups unfortunately are doomed to fail, and so it's a question of can you get lucky. Maybe if you don't want to rely on luck of picking a startup, then what are your other options, right? You can sort of grind out a salary, which is completely fine. Like there's no problem with that, and it's something that I've obviously been doing for a long time. But are you ever going to get to the point where you can, maybe be mortgage free or completely debt free or something, and live completely financially independent? Possible, but it might take you a very long time. So if you want to take a little bit more of a risk, or I want to take a little bit more of a risk and say, like, can I achieve that in, maybe the next 5 years? And so it looks like to me, owning something is the most the high risk, high reward, possibly, way of getting there. But that's what sort of motivates me to do it. I'm not like motivated by money. I don't care about cars and watches and clothes and whatever. Like everything I own I don't think I own anything it's worth more than £1,000. But it's not about, you know, the material stuff. It's just about the independence for me. So that's why I'm doing it.
You obviously haven't gotten into the bicycle craze. I think I'd be similar. My fashion is definitely not expensive, but my
Yeah.
bicycle, unfortunately, that costs a bit.
Yeah, I lied. I have a camera that cost me £2,000, but I think that's the most expensive thing I own.
Cool. And was there anything about the pandemic, like so that's your underlying
Yeah,
motivation? Was there anything that triggered like with the pandemic, or what? Why now?
yeah, definitely. I think um, that did play a big part in it. I think it was like with a lot of people, right? It gives everyone a chance to sort of stop and take a minute and look back, you know, look at what they've been doing and think about where they want to go. Possibly some, like for me, it was a house move. It was, you know, change of circumstances with my wife and everything. And we moved out of London and whatever else. And it gives you a chance to sort of think, okay, what I'm actually, you know, wanting to achieve. And I think the biggest like underlying factor for this for me was just if not now, then when? It's like that was the question I was asking myself and talking to my wife about and everything. So if I wasn't going to do it now, you know, when would I do it later? Would we have kids? Would we have other responsibilities? You know, would we be somewhere else in the world? All of those things that, you know, if the answer is yes to any of them, then maybe the idea, you know, wouldn't work, or maybe taking this project on wouldn't work. And so that was really it. It's like, why not? Why not do it? And so I think like obviously taking a leap here is, you know, sometimes, well, it was hard for me, and I'm sure it's hard for a lot of people. It's hard to leave behind a salary or some security to take the risk to do something like this. But you know, it's like you have to weigh it up in different ways, right? And I think, well, maybe we can talk about this as well. There's different ways of maybe like de-risking that, and there's different ways to think about taking different risks. So like for me, I'm actually working 2 days a week full time with Monzo still, and 3 days a week on like full time on my own project. So that's sort of my way of de-risking it a little bit. But there's obviously other ways to de-risk it as well. But something that that Tom Blomfeld, from the founder of Monzo, says quite, I've heard him say a few times, and I totally believe it, is that most people can take more risk than they think. I think for a lot of people in the industry, maybe you have some savings or you have something to fall back on. You know, it's a privileged position to be in. I definitely understand that, being able to say, well, if this doesn't work, it doesn't matter, I'll do something else, or I'll have family there to help me, or whatever it is. Like, it's definitely a privileged position to be in. But if you are in that position, it's good to understand that you're in that position, and then you can leverage it. And, you know, so if everything else works out, are you, you know, what's the worst that can happen? And if you think of it that way, then maybe you're more likely to take more risk than you think you can. Does that make
Yeah, no,
sense?
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And the other way that I think in kind of like a product iterative approach, it'll always be until you start and start encountering and figuring out how to solve the problems. Like that's the only way that you can actually go. You have to start and then hit the roadblocks and figure out what to do. And because if you try plan it all out ahead of time, it's just not going to work. It's good that you're open that your idea will likely change, because most likely it will in
Yeah,
certain ways.
absolutely. And that's something that I'm already considering changing already. I'm at the point where I've not even launched it, and I'm like, actually, maybe this isn't quite what I wanted it to be, or maybe the thing I was envisioning is a bit too big, and I want to like focus on some specific area after talking to people and getting a little bit of feedback. That's probably already happening. Maybe hopefully for the better. But an interesting part of that as well, like the reason that I think probably the reason I'm doing, you know, part-time at Monzo still, is because that to me is probably the best avenue for getting feedback that I'll ever have. So this is a product that I'm building, which is, you know, would be a useful thing for Monzo if this product existed today, that you could just go out and buy off the shelf from somebody else. Then Monzo would probably have bought it, right? And they would be using it. And so when you're in that situation, it's a tool that the company that you're working at might really already want to use. And if that is the case, then you might have the potential to say, look, I'm going to build this thing, but why don't you help me like use it early? You get the value from it while it's, you know, something you can't currently buy, but you can start to get value from it. And at the same time, I'm going to learn a lot from it, which will hopefully shape the product in a good way. If you're taking that challenge on yourself without that support of a company, which many people do, then the hardest part is knowing what to build and going and talking to the customers. So you have to build something, you know, sell it to people, maybe give it away for free initially, go and talk to 5 customers, get them using it, and then you start that iterative cycle of improvements, right? By far the best way to build something, that's that, it's going from an idea to something that's actually useful. And if you can do that within a company you already work at, you've got a shortcut. There's absolutely no way that if I didn't work there and they didn't know who I was, that I'd be able to test a product internally at that company, you know, without going through all the security compliance onboarding stuff that every like supplier goes through. It's like a regulated industry. You have to like jump through all of these hoops. And I mean, not just jump through hoops, like they're there for a reason. But there's lots of things that you have to do to prove that you have like certain compliance stuff. And if you work there and they know you, maybe there's some ways you can work around that stuff. Like, well, let's run it in a test environment and let's not touch any production data. And, you know, you don't have to go through particular onboarding stuff because it could be hosted maybe within the company's infrastructure or some other thing like that. And so there's ways to, you know, leverage that for research for yourself. And that's like a massive leg up compared to just completely being out there on your own, you know, fighting for people to try and help give you feedback.
And how did you negotiate that with your boss? Like, I'm assuming if you said I'm building a bank, they probably wouldn't have been too happy. But so how did you negotiate it?
Well, that's a good question. I think the like step one is like having a good relationship with the people who, you know, your bosses or the people who run the company at the highest levels if possible, right? Like if you come out of nowhere, you know, maybe you've never spoken to them before and you all of a sudden say, hey, I want to build this thing. Is it going to work? I'm not sure. I think like having that, you know, relationship and awareness is probably a quite important thing. And then after that, it was really, I suppose like I should give a lot of credit to Jonas, who's the CTO of Monzo, who I sort of spoke to the most about this idea. And for him, this was, you know, I think he's very keen to see people who have been, you know, part of the Monzo family to like go and succeed and do their own things. And so I think for him, I don't want to sort of quote him here, but to paraphrase, it was sort of like, you know, the best reason somebody could leave Monzo is to go and build their own thing, and not because they don't like working at Monzo, right, or want to work somewhere else where they think it's going to be better. If it's one of those reasons, then maybe Monzo's not done everything they can. But if it's, you know, I'm not going to work at another company, I just want to do my own thing, then that's a very hard, it's a hard thing to stop people doing, and probably you don't want to stop people doing it, right, because they want to do that. So I think for him, his perspective on it was, well, how can we help you succeed, rather than, you know, how can we stop you doing it? And if helping me succeed means Monzo losing some of the time, that was something that he was willing to go for. Thankfully, I don't know if that's a common case. I think Monzo, like people seem to care a lot about people at Monzo, which is one of the reasons I'm there in the first place. And I can imagine that there'd be many bosses who wouldn't take the same stance, but thankfully for me, that's how I went about it. And it's always worth having the conversation, even if you think that there's no chance. I think, you know, it's a similar story to negotiating when you're joining a company. You know, companies offer you some salary and some benefits and whatever it is, but absolutely everything is negotiable. People think that you can't change that. You can't say, hey, I want this laptop or this home office or to move to this country or whatever it is, right? Like everything's negotiable when you're doing that. It's just a matter of asking the question. If you never ask the question, you're just going to, you know, sign the papers that are there, then it's never going to happen for you. So I think it's a little bit don't ask, don't get, and it's also just knowing the people and having that relationship.
Yeah, and it's a delicate balance when you still don't have the relationship, if you're just starting the job. But it's
Yeah,
definitely something that I've experienced, that once you're in the job you've established, then you can go back and negotiate a lot of things.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, would it work if you've been there for 6 months? I doubt it. If you've been there for a longer time, or have some kind of, you know, you're known to be effective as a person in that company, then probably it's more likely it's going to happen for you.
Great. So you've talked about like the challenges along the way in terms of the product. So you said you think you're building too big, you might pivot it a little bit. What about the team, or what is the team? Who is the team? And any
The
challenges?
team for what I'm building,
Yeah.
the team is me, right now, but that's something I'm thinking about, right? There's always a question. There's a trade-off of, how fast do you want to go? How fast do you want to build? There's no doubt that with the team of a few people, this could be, you could probably accelerate with some high multiple of getting stuff done. But then you've got to figure out how do you get those people. So you either convince people to do what you're doing and work for nothing, because maybe not nothing, work for a share in the company, but shares that are worth nothing on paper, right? Or you pay them, and then you've got to figure out where you're going to pay them from. So you've got to think, okay, can I bankroll it myself? Do I have those savings? Unlikely. Do you have to go and raise money for it? If you go and raise money, then now you have investors who you need to uh, deliver results to. If you're taking someone else's money, you have to do something good with it. You have a duty to. So that's the balance, right? Do you take money, hire 5 people, and speed everything up, or do you try and do it on your own for a little bit and see where it goes? And it is definitely a tricky thing to balance, and I'm still trying to figure that out myself. So right now the team is me. Sorry, I forgot what the rest of the question
Well,
was.
yeah, it was around that. So, but no, it's an interesting point around the funding model, because now what I'm seeing a lot with VCs is there's almost two different VC funding models.
Yeah.
Tiger Capital are becoming very uh, famous in the industry for being just here's money and walking away and not being very hands-on. Whereas a lot of other VCs would argue that that's actually only half the value. The money gets you half of it, but the contacts and the advice and the kind of other bits are the other half of the value. So
Yeah.
do you have you looked into that, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I have. I think it's like every product, right, needs two things. You need the product to be good, and you need distribution. I think like distribution is not something I'm particularly good at. And so, I don't have, let's say, like a big Twitter presence, or, I'm not in big engineering communities in such a way that I can easily reach lots of people with a product that I'm launching, for example. And so that would be something that I would look to leverage if I was going to raise money. For me, that network, or the things that VCs might be able to bring to the table, is probably more valuable than it might be for somebody who is really good at distribution. And they might not need that help. They might just need cash to pay for salaries, for example. And so that's something that I keep in mind when I'm thinking about how I'm going to do this. Is, yeah, what could I get from, how will they help me the most? And so that's probably why I would lean towards doing that. But there's other ways, right? It's not necessarily just VCs. If you're looking for like good distribution network to test things out, especially early products, there's like plenty of startup accelerators. Something I'm considering is, Y Combinator or other similar things. Basically, their whole thing is, do we like the person? We'll just take a small gamble on them. They pay something like, I think it's like $120,000, and they take 7% of the company, and they're basically just funding you to, your living costs for 6 months or a year, whatever it is. If you live in San Francisco, probably like 3 months, and then they put you in touch with everyone, because there's like 1,000 companies that go through YC every week or whatever now. And then you have a base to start with, and you have people willing to try your product early, and you have a good way to get that initial distribution. Right? When you're just starting out, you don't need more than 5 companies to talk to learn that your product sucks or that it's great. You only need a handful of people, and so that's another avenue to get that before you then move to the next stages where you might need more distribution in terms of like sales or whatever it is. So there's plenty of options. I think for me, I'm trying to figure out when the right time to start to leverage those things is. I'm kind of leaning towards going down an accelerator route if possible. But I also want to feel like I'm going into that with a product that I want to be committed to myself. And so, I'd like to get feedback initially from a few people, ideally Monzo, and maybe a few others, and see, is this really something that I want to commit the next few years of my life to? Or could it even pivot into something before going down that route? So that's why I'm sort of holding up a little bit on that.
Great. It's great to kind of see the thinking that goes on behind it. And that kind of, it just leads quite, as you were saying, the kind of the real motivation. Is this something that I'm happy to devote so much of my life to? Because startups are never easy. There's always going to be hard work. And that then comes back to your original motivation. So you want the financial independence, but do you want that so that you have more free time? Is that the ultimate goal? Because then are you countering your goal with starting a startup?
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting question, because I think for a lot of people, startups can be a big grind where you put years and years into something, and then maybe it takes off and maybe it doesn't. I don't know if it has to be that way. Maybe there's something about the kind of people that are successful in that business, especially like tech startups, where they're the kind of people who will dedicate everything to the company, and they'll put the other parts of their life on hold, or maybe not on hold, but maybe not devote the same amount of time as they would to, let's say, family or some other commitments. I don't know if it has to be that way. I think it's probably possible to build a company without saying, I'm not going to see my family for years, and I'm going to be awake all night and doing things all the time. I think it's possible to do it that way. I hope it's possible to do it that way. That's probably my aim. And so I'm kind of looking at it as it's like a full-time job, and there'll be more commitments in some facets. Like I'll probably be on call for the alerts that I need for my own company when things, let's say something's broken. Who's going to fix it? If it's the middle of the night and they have customers in America using it, and you're just a small team, or just you, like it's going to be you. So maybe you're going to be going from doing an on-call shift at Monzo once every 6 weeks with your team, to you're on call every day forever, for years. And that's probably a sacrifice that you're going to have to take. But does it mean you have to work beyond 6 o'clock or whatever it is and never see your family? Like, not necessarily. I don't think that's a particularly healthy way of doing it. So that's going to be my aim, is to do it that way. Maybe I'll live to regret that, or well, maybe I won't live to regret it. Even if it doesn't work, I'll still done what I wanted to do, and spend time with family and whatever else. So I think time at the end of the day is the motivator. And so don't give it up for no reason, right?
Yeah, it's the poster child for that model in the past was Basecamp, because they just advocated the 9 to 5 approach. The past year hasn't been so kind to the company, but I still think it's a good one to emulate if you can. I honestly struggle with it. I'd love to spend less time on startup, but it is unfortunately there's always things to be done. But yeah, so just what's your future plans? What are your hopes with the startup?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously to achieve my goal, but I think the plan is to try and get some traction, right? Like the hardest thing right now for me is that I sit in my office at home on my own with a whiteboard and a computer for 3 days a week and go, God, what am I going to build, right? And like, I don't just sit there the whole time worrying about that. Like, actually, you got to try and it's like trying to write a book. It's like you can sit staring at a blank page for a week, or you can just start writing and then fix it later. And that's like my approach, is just start building something, and then like you can make it good afterwards. But that's sort of the thing I struggle with the most. Like, what should I build and when? Which features matter, which don't? And so what I'd like to achieve in the short term is like a cohesive set of features, that I think adds a decent amount of value, and then just start getting that out into people's hands, start to see some traction. I don't think that, like, you see different companies go through this. Or if you ever watch like like Dragon's Den or something, right, where you get people come in and the investors are like, I'm not going to invest because this is going to be this might be a good business for you, but it's never going to be huge, and they're only going to invest if it's going to be huge. Well, that doesn't mean it's a failure, right? It might, if it's a good business for you, maybe it can be a company that sustains 3 people's salaries, and it generates more money than you would get paid as if you worked at the company, as a salary. It doesn't mean it's a failure. And so I think that, like, as I said before, people that are shooting for the next Google or Uber or whatever it is, odds are stacked against them, but some of them go for it, and that's great, but it doesn't have to be the goal. And so that's my hope. Is obviously I'd like to have a situation where things just snowball and everyone wants it, and people are throwing money at you to use this product or whatever, and it grows amazingly. But the likelihood is it's like a slow grind, and if you can get up to the point where you're generating some revenue, that's an amazing start. So that's my aim in the next probably 3 to 6 months, is to really decide, is this the idea that I'm going to carry on with, and can it start generating some revenue and generate some interest, or should I move on to something else? That's the immediate goal.
Excellent. No, it's really interesting. I'm sure some of the people listening might be screaming about doing some UX processes to try focus where to start building. But
absolutely, and I am doing that as well. I have a couple of really good sort of product design and design people who I have been talking with a little bit. I've worked with in the past, so helping me out to figure out where the value really comes from and what makes sense as a product. But it's tricky.
It's a huge problem for everybody. It's not just, but it is very difficult. Well, what's the smallest set that adds value? But yeah, no, I wish you the very best. It was really good conversation, and hope every success for the business.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.